This is Main Street with Gary Allen. Now, here's Gary.
And hello, everybody, and welcome to Main Street. Gary Allen with you. Hope everybody is well since the last time that we were together. Hope everybody is safe and sound. I know a lot of my friends who live in the North Carolina area and Tennessee are battling coming out of that hurricane. I hope all will be well with you and God's blessing on you, that you got through it and no one lost their lives in your family. I know some people did, but let's hope that the hurricane season is going to be over with soon. So let's hope there's no more destruction and no more loss of life. Today's program is probably going to be one of my favorites of all time. I know that already because this gentleman is probably one of the best there is in the business. Before I get to that, though, I just want to thank the Japanese Gardens for their continued support of this program. Rick Del Vecchio, my executive producer, Tommy Sitt, who is my producer on the premises, helping me out as he does every week to get this program going. The gentleman who I have today is probably one of the most famous comedians in the world. He's also one of the nicest gentlemen you'll ever meet in the world, and I know that I've made a friend quickly through him. His name is Tom Dreesen. If the name sounds familiar, he was in the opening act for a decade and a half or 2 decades for the late Mr. Frank Sinatra, the gentleman who we all love and worshiped his music very, very much. But Tom is a comedian, actor, motivational speaker. He's also a master of ceremonies. He's I knew I was going to get this right. Philanthropist, author of Still Standing, a story about his life in show business. Tom has appeared in over 500 television shows, 60 times alone on The Tonight Show. He's also been on The Late Show with David Letterman and filled in for David when David was taking some sabbatical or two. He's open for such people as Smokey Robinson, Tony Orlando, Gladys Knight, Liza Minnelli, Sammy Davis, and of course, for the great Frank Sinatra. Would you please welcome Mr. Tom Dreesen?
Well, thank you for that wonderful introduction. My career is almost as long as that introduction. I really appreciate that. Thanks, Gary.
Well, hey, listen, you are from Illinois, Harvey, Illinois. You are also one of the kindest gentlemen. I met you many years ago at the Improv. You would come in to see somebody. I shook hands. It was one of those, "Hi, how are you?" And you kept going, and I stood there, and it was actually Robin Williams that introduced me to you. So it was like, but we also had a mutual friend. She's no longer with us, Pam, who used to think I was related to you, and I could never figure out because people would look at you and then look at me and go, "There's no resemblance at all whatsoever." None. I mean, zero.
Who is the mutual?
Pam
friend?
Matson.
Oh, Pam Matson. God bless her. Yeah, she was a great girl.
Yeah,
she's very talented.
Yes, she's no longer with us, as a lot of the great comedians are. I'll go back to my Larry King days. Why comedy? Why be a comedian? What was it? Was it at a very early age you said, "That's what I want to do"?
Totally by accident. I had no thought of ever becoming a stand-up comedian. As a kid, I loved hearing jokes. I used to shine shoes in all the taverns in my neighborhood. I had 8 brothers and sisters, and we were very poor. We lived in a shack where we had no bathtub and no shower and no hot water. And it was a rat-infested, roach-infested shack. And so I shined shoes in taverns. I set pins in bowling alleys. I caddied in the summertime. I sold newspapers, all to help feed my brothers and sisters. None of this do I regret. But the shining shoes, all the taverns in my neighborhood, there were 36 taverns in Harvey, Illinois. There were 8 in my neighborhood. My mother was a bartender in one of them. And so I would shine shoes in all the taverns. There were steel mills and factories around there. And I'd go to that tavern last because my mom was there. And I'd shine shoes there, and I'd wait for the shifts to change, and I'd go back out again. Well, behind the bar was my mom's brother-in-law, her sister's husband, and my Uncle Frank, and he would tell jokes behind the bar. And as a little boy, I was fascinated by this guy with his vocabulary and his vernacular could cause this sound to come out of people's body that would fill the room like electricity and unite everybody. A little kid, it just fascinated me. So I used to tell his jokes, many that should not be told on a Catholic school playground, but nonetheless, I like joke telling. Now, I went in the service, I mean, in my childhood, my teen years, I'd always hear a funny story and I'd relate it to other people. When I went in the service the 4 years, I was the guy that would always have a new joke or something like that, but never thought I'd be in children's. I came out of the service. I joined the JCs. Ended up getting married, had 3 kids. I joined a civic group called the JCs, at that time, Union Chamber of Commerce. And I wrote a drug education program teaching grade school children the ills of drug abuse with humor, a concept I had, getting the kids laughing, playing music, and then planting the seeds of the ills of drug abuse. And helping me on the project was a young black man that just graduated from Norfolk State College. E.I. DuPont recruited him out of college into Chicago to be a marketing. He joined the JCs.
Yeah, Tim Reed. And the program became very, very successful. And one day, a little 8th grade girl walking out of the classroom said, "You guys are funny. You ought to become a comedy team." And the thought of a black-white comedy team intrigued us, and we started writing what we thought was material. And we became America's first black and white comedy team, and history shows we're the last. Yes.
There's never been one since. And we stayed together 6 years and toured the North and the South when there were no comedy clubs. There weren't any comedy clubs in America. So we worked what they affectionately call the Chitlin Circuit, black-owned, black-operated nightclubs. The 20 Grand in Detroit. That's where Motown was in those days. The Sugar Shack in Boston, the Club Harlem in Atlantic City, the Cotton Club in Chicago, on and on and on. And then the team split up, and I went out on my own.
Tommy, let's see that first picture, please. Who is this guy here, huh?
Oh, man. It's a guy with a lot of black hair. That picture was taken on the Dinosaur Show. Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
And then let's see the next picture, please. I think this is the one that there you go. That's you and Tim.
That's us on a stage in Chicago called Mr. Kelly's.
Yes.
And I'll show you how, we wrote a book in 2005 called Tim and Tom, an American Comedy in Black and White. And I'll show you how I wanted to call the book Before Our Time, but the publisher didn't. But we were way before our time. That's a routine. Where now this is 1971. I was interviewing the first black president of the United States. That was one of our routines. That's how ahead of our time we were.
Yeah.
I said, when you become president, what is the first thing you're going to do? He said, I'm going to ask Congress to enact a law that dead people are not allowed to vote in Chicago. And then I said, okay, what's the second thing you're going to do? He said, I'm going to ask Congress to enact a law that live people are not allowed to vote in Mississippi.
Well, it's funny you say that. When I lived in Chicago, of course, I worked in the Attorney General's office for Neil Hartigan, a gentleman who I know you heard of and more than once. And I remember hearing all these stories about Chicago and the dead people voting. And I finally turned to Neil one day and I said, is there any, obviously dead people aren't voting. He said, no, but we vote for them because we know that if they were alive, that's who they want to vote for.
That's a great line. By the way, did you know somebody named Kerry Polizzi who worked in that same office? Kerry Polizzi, maybe it's before your time.
It might have been a little bit before my time because he had a couple of administrations, and I didn't get into Chicago until 1984. Yeah, because I just left L.A. and I got there in 84. My wife was from Hinsdale Downers Grove, and Gracie, and she worked for J. Walter Thompson. She was a magnificent marketing person.
Wow.
And we moved there, and we moved in the dead of winter. So to me, it was like, what am I doing here? I'm from Florida. I lived in California. Oh my God, it's like freezing cold. Ow, get me out of here.
Yeah, I've been out here in California for 45 years or more. I miss Chicago every single day of my life, but I don't miss 40 below zero.
No, 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 I don't either. You know, it's funny. Bobby Rydell and I were friends, and I said to him once, I said, Bobby, why didn't you move to California like all the other guys from South Philly? He said, Gary, I went out there for a short period of time. It isn't my thing. I'd rather be home in Philadelphia, because he was a big sports fan, and he was more comfortable there. Chicago is a city that makes you feel welcome. It does. I was new to Chicago. Grace was the one who was from the Hinsdale area. She's the one that worked on Michigan Avenue her whole career. I mean, I was a nobody. I mean, I was Gary Allen, who did Hill Street Blues, St. Elsewhere, did a bunch of things in LA, but big deal to the people of Chicago. That doesn't mean anything, you know? And suddenly they welcomed me. There was like, the only thing they held against me was a lot of them were Notre Dame fans, and they knew I went to the U. So it was like, come that Saturday, it was always like, a little bit, they would shun me that week a little bit. And Neil finally turned to me one day and he said, are they still shunning you? I said, well, they're Notre Dame fans. He said, most of them couldn't even get into Notre Dame. So well, it was.
Chicago's a city. If you're an entertainer, when you start out in Chicago, they get behind you 100%. They'll write about you. They're proud of you, but they want you to eventually leave them to show the rest of the country that they were right about you. Yes. I always say, I make the analogy to young entertainers why you have to leave. I'll say, if you're an 18 or 19-year-old kid and you leave your parents' home, you break their hearts. But if you come back at 24 or 25 for success, they adore you. Stay with your parents till you're 35 and see how much they adore you.
Well, it's funny. You say that. When I was in high school down in Hollywood, Florida, my dad was based there with the airlines, with Eastern. And I wasn't in the in crowd. I wasn't in the out crowd. I mean, I had a brother who was a professional football player. And I wasn't really an athlete. I played baseball. I love baseball. I think baseball is still the greatest sport around. And nobody would pay attention to me. The girls wouldn't pay attention to me, everything. Suddenly I come home to visit my mom and dad living in LA, and we go to a restaurant. And who was the hostess but the head cheerleader that wouldn't give me the time of day if I dropped dead in front of her in high school? Suddenly she sees me, but she goes, oh, Gary, I saw you on TV. She hands me her number, and she says, give me a call. I said, you see what's on my finger here? That's a wedding ring. I don't break those vows for nobody. Hollywood, Florida is like a melting pot for people from New York, New Jersey, and Philly, and all the other places. Chicago is just a warm place. I mean, it's just a great place. And the one thing I found out in the wintertime, the bars are centrally located. In case your butt is getting a little cold, you can dip in, get a drink, move on to the next bar till you need a drink.
Well, you know how that came about. The Germans built Chicago in the 1800s, and especially after the Chicago fire. After the Chicago fire, they rebuilt all those neighborhoods. And what the Germans would do, they would first go to a corner. The first building they built was a tavern. And then they started building houses all the way up the block. So whenever they had lunch breaks, they went into the tavern. And so every corner in Chicago at one time had a tavern, the corner tavern, And so it's part of the neighborhood. The corner tavern where I grew up at, my mom was a bartender. And I attended bar in that same bar when I came out of the service. The corner tavern in Chicago is a social center. It's where you go to find out, did Gary get the job? Did Louise have the baby? And back when I was growing up, it was a social center, and there were factories around there. So everybody, they after the shift was over, they would go into this tavern, have a beer or two before they went home,
Yeah, exactly. Getting back to, when was your first time by yourself on stage or with Tim? And were your legs shaking like most of us do when it's the first time you get on stage?
The first time I went on stage with Tim, there weren't any comedy clubs. So there wasn't a place to break in 5 minutes or 10 minutes. You know what I mean? Like they have today, open mic nights and stuff like that. So when you were writing an act, you had to write a nightclub act, an act that you thought would be a good opening act. So we wrote what we thought was around 20 minutes of material. And we finally went into a little jazz club and asked, when the group takes their break, could we get up and do the 20 minutes? We were so afraid. We were in the kitchen and they're bringing food in and out. you're gagging. The guy introduced us. We rushed on stage, the owner of the place. We rushed on stage, and we did that 20 minutes in about 7.5. We just kept, hi, we're the comedy team, and Tim and Tom. He's Tim, I'm Tom. And we were going 100 miles an hour, just trying to remember all of our lines, not pausing for laughs, just rush, 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 rush. We rushed off the stage. We got the owner in the corner. We said, how'd we do? How'd we do? He said, I don't know how you did. Come back tomorrow and slow down so I can find out how you did. We went back the next day and we did good, and we became a comic. And the first time I went alone, that was a scary time as well, because I had been with Tim for 6 years and I'd never been on stage alone. And now when I had to go on stage alone, it was a totally different thing. But I, as you pointed out earlier, I'm a motivational speaker. I've read literally hundreds of books on the powers of the mind, from Norman Vincent Peale, The Power of Positive Thinking, A Guide to Confident Living, Think and Grow Rich, Psycho-Cybernetics, The Power of Your Subconscious Mind,
right.
On and on and on. So I read a lot of these books, and they really helped me a lot with stage presence. Act as if you are and you will be. If you want to be confident on a stage, act as if you are, even no matter what's going on inside of you. Act you are, and you'll eventually become that. And I have now. I'm more comfortable on stage than I am on the street or in an audience.
Yeah, actually, it's like for me, when I was doing corporate shows around the country, when I lived in Las Vegas and I got hired to do corporate, the agent turned to, or the woman who booked me turned to my agent, who just happened to want to come along, and said, is he going to be okay up there? And he said, he's more comfortable up there than he is down here talking to us. So I wouldn't worry about Gary at all whatsoever. Do you remember the first joke you ever told?
Well, I mean, you mean on stage or in real life,
Well, either way, Tom. It's by the way, Tom Dreesen joins us here on Main Street. Gary Allen with you, and I hope you're enjoying the program. He's going to be with us for another 45 minutes or so. So we're having a good time talking about his life in show business. And there it is. If you want to get a hold of Tom, there's his website, and it's full of information. You can also get his book, Still Standing, which is a fabulous book. I don't have it, but I have read different parts of it over the years. It's his life in show business. I actually had a better title for you: From Chicago to LA to Sinatra and Beyond.
Well, that's my subtitle. The book is called Still Standing. My subtitle is My Journey from Streets and Saloons to the Stage and Sinatra. Yep. And by the way, it's on Amazon. But I'm so proud of it. It's got almost 500 5-star reviews now, and it still sells all the time. And I'm real proud of it. It's a work. It was a long work in progress, and now I enjoy getting the remarks from it.
Well, it was a long work in progress to get to that book, because if anybody understands what the world of show business is like, it's full of ups and downs, ins and outs, and you get kicked in the butt and they'll eat you alive. People say to me all the time, I'm going to go to LA. My uncle knows so-and-so. And I go, so?
Yeah.
I said, if you ain't got a resume, a friend of mine is on a soap opera, and he said, Gary, these young kids that are coming in today, they've got credits. They're like 3 pages long compared to what it used to be 30 years ago, where they'd have 1 or 2 credits, but they were good looking. You have got to hit the ground running. It's a 24/7 job. And if you don't have the dedication, you ain't going to make it.
Oh, for sure. You know what? People always say in any endeavor, they'll say, tell the truth, Tom. It's who you know, right? I said, yeah, who you know will get you in the door. What you know keeps you in the house. Who you know will get you in the door. But
absolutely.
So whenever kids say to me, I'm going to college and I love show business, I want to be an actor or a comedian or whatever, I say, okay, major in communications, but minor in business. Because we're in show business. That's 2 words, show and business. And the business is equally important to know this business. And it's hard to, again, I'm a motivational talker. As a sideline, I enjoy it so much. And corporate America hires me, and I do colleges and universities. And I like to motivate. but I want you to be realistic about it too, but I like you to motivate. But, number one, wherever you are, start where you are. If you're in Toledo, start there. Start learning all about that craft you want to be in there. Two, work as often as you can. Get up on that stage as many times as you can.
Yep.
Three, read the book, The Magic of Believing by Claude Versto. If you can't believe in yourself, how do you expect an audience to believe in you? Four, realize no one is ever going to help you. Now, I don't mean that you're never going to be helped. No one is ever going to help you until you're marketable. Agents and managers, if you can't make money for them, they're not going to waste their time. So start out thinking, no one is going to help me but me. I have on my desk right now, and I've had it there for 55 years. If it is to be, it's up to me. And 5, don't ever quit. Bertrand Russell once said, there are people in show business who become major stars simply because they didn't have sense enough to quit when they should have.
Yeah.
That's my story. That's your story. That's time after time after time, I was knocked to my knees. Time after time after time, I was rejected. Time after time, I was told there's no room for you. I was told by family, relatives, what are you doing in this crazy business, this precarious business?
Yeah.
And I wanted to be a stand-up comedian. And thank God, 55 years, a wonderful career. And I'm still standing.
Yeah. It's the same as me. I mean, I grew up with an uncle, Tubby Boots, who was a comedian on Miami Beach forever and a day. God rest his soul. And that was not where I was going to begin. I wanted to be following my dad's footsteps. I wanted to be an airline pilot. But my time in the Air Force, my vision started to kind of wane a little as a pilot, flying helicopters over in Southeast Asia. So I knew that wasn't going to be a reality. So I went back to college and I studied journalism. And then I got on stage one night as a lark, and I made some people laugh. And I went, ooh, me like that. Yeah. Me like the girls in the audience too. Anyway, Getting back to your first joke, whether it was in the bar or on stage, do you remember what it was?
No, I really don't, because I wrote probably thousands of jokes in my career.
Yeah.
Every time you did the Tonight Show, you had to do a new 6 minutes. And Johnny didn't want two guys going to bar jokes. He wanted original monologues. So I was in a constant state of writing new material. I can't remember. I remember going into the Catholic school that I went to was Ascension School in Harvey, and they had some kind of a dinner to raise money for something, and they asked me to get up and MC, and I got up and I told some jokes about the nuns, about the priests that I went to school with, and if I thought about it, I could probably think of some of the jokes, but I said I was so proud of all the nuns. First of all, I named all the nuns that taught me, 8 nuns. Sister Catherine Margaret, Sister Margareta, Sister Bernadette Mary, Sister Marie Andre, Sister Anne Cecile, Sister Bertilda, Sister Thomasita, and Sister Madonna Treese. I said, I'll put those 8 nuns up against any SWAT team in America. Every one of those nuns were members of the NRA. The National Ruler Association,
my wife Gracie went to a parochial school in I think Downers Grove or Hinsdale, I can't remember which, and to this very day if she saw a ruler coming, she ran for the hills. I mean, even as a grown woman, she was scared to death of rulers. I mean, she really was. But driving a car, as we did across the country, she had that plastic Jesus right on the dashboard, and she drive like a wild woman, like a bat out of hell. I'm going to tell you that right now.
My early routines were about growing up, because I met Jack Benny when I'd been in show business about 4 months, and I was a big fan of his, because I think a person is an artist in any endeavor, bartender, truck driver, bricklayer. When you make your work look, one word, effortless. Frank Sinatra made singing look easy. You will be my music. You will be my song. You say, I can do that. No, you can't. He just made it look like you could. Jack Benny made comedy look easy. And so I asked him for advice. He said, Tommy, when you first walk out on that Tonight Show, now the Tonight Show was the furthest thing from my mind in those days. He said, you're going to face 28 million people, 30 million people. Don't talk about the government or the airlines, or talk about where you're from. Write jokes about where you're from your mom and your dad, your brothers and sisters, when you went to school. He said, when you walk off that Tonight Show after 6 minutes of laughter, they say, wasn't he funny? And he's from a suburb on the south side of Chicago called Harvey, Illinois. That's where his accent was from. That he went to Catholic school. He had 8 brothers and sisters. His mom wanted him to become a priest. All these jokes I wrote, when I walked off, they knew about you. And that was advice, right? I tell young comedians, your first 10 minutes about you and where you're from. Now you can go off into any area you want.
You humanize it. He's saying, humanize who you are. Let them know who you are. Bring them into you and make them yours. And that's what I love about the old style comedians. I had Dale Jones on, and then Chris DePetta, who's a very dear friend of mine, and I know you know who Chris is, obviously. I hate dirty jokes. I'm sorry. Oh, yeah, I tell them. But when you're on stage and a woman or a young man is telling a dirty, filthy joke. Now, my Uncle Tubby was a blue comic. He said, don't you ever tell a dirty joke. It doesn't fit who you are at your age. And I just don't like the F-bomb and all this other stuff just for the sake of doing it. Use your brain.
Yeah.
Use your head. There's a Mexican girl out there who lives in L.A. AJ is her name. And she's funny. She talks about her and her husband and her family life. She's a very funny comic. Dale Jones is very funny. He and his wife talk about their life. And that's what Jack and the great comics did. Alan King on the Ed Sullivan Show, he talked about his world.
Well, I'm not a prude. I'm a street guy. I don't have a degree from academia, but I got a doctorate from the streets.
Yeah.
I know every dirty joke, and I've told them at stag parties and stuff. But when I started out in show business, that's 2 words, show and business. How do you become a success? I watched the Tonight Show. One appearance on the Tonight Show, Freddie Prinze got a sitcom the next day. So I said, oh, I see. In order to be a success in this business, now that was before cable. I said, you have to write material that can make grandma and grandpa, mom and dad, and the kids laugh. And so that's what I had to do to make it in the business. I'll tell you a funny story. About 6 months ago, I went to the Laugh Factory here in Hollywood to try out some new material. And there were I was upstairs looking at my notes, getting ready to go on. And around the corner were 2 young comedians that I didn't know they were there, and they didn't know I was there. And one of them said, hey, Tom Dreesen's here tonight. And the other one said, oh, yeah, he's old school. And the other comedian said, he's old school? What do you mean? He said, well, he doesn't use the F word. And the kid said, he doesn't use the F word. What does he use for adjectives? And I stuck my head around the corner and I said, adjectives. That's what I use for adjectives.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's just, I just don't like it. I don't like smart comedians. I remember Jay Leno and I and Will Schreiner, we were sitting at the Improv one night, and one young comedian asked him about, any advice. And Jay said, if you're clean, you work everywhere. If you're dirty, you're limiting yourself to working in a few places. Don't do it to yourself. Use your head for what it is. Bud Friedman believed in that too. Bud was.
That's all changed now, though.
Yeah, I know. Yeah.
The cable, when cable came along, and you could, had cable been along when I started, I don't know. I might have. I don't think so though, because I always think it's a cheap way to get a laugh. But nonetheless, I was doing more corporate dates than most comedians. I was doing, and it's where I wanted to be honest with you. But again, I'm not a prude. I know I can sit in the locker room at my country club and tell all the jokes that from aboard ship and everything. But the other thing, I was touring in 1977. Sammy Davis Jr. took me on the road for 3 years. His audience was a family audience. Then from there, I went with Tony Orlando and Don. His family, his audience were family audiences. Then I went with Smokey Robinson. They were family audience, and it was their show. So they didn't want a comic out in front of them that would insult the audience.
No.
And then finally Frank Sinatra. One night at Caesar's Palace, working with Frank, I had not a heckler, but I had a guy who was talking to me. And I always qualify them, and I teach young comedians how to do that. Don't just jump on some guy's throat. He might be the nicest guy in the world. He might be saying, we love you, and you thought he said, get off the stage or something. So I qualified. I kept asking this guy questions because he was interrupting my act. And it turns out he's a real nice guy. And I qualified him as to what kind of a guy he was. He wanted attention. And at some point, he said something. I asked him a question. He said something, and I said, "No shit," because and now the audience, because I'd already revealed that. After the show, Frank Sinatra came up to me and said, "Tommy, funny stuff, but by the way, Tom, you don't need to swear to be funny." Now,
No.
Today, that is so mild of a thing to say, but today, even Frank, and off stage, he was a guy, he was a street guy. You could tell every joke you want. He felt the stage was a sacred place. And you desecrated that by using foul language. So what can I say?
It was hollow ground. Even to my uncle, who was a blue comic, it was a hollowed ground. It was a place where they made a living. It is a place where they try to impress people. I want to go back to 1982. You did something that you are known for in the world. I knew about this, your kindness, your generosity, your philanthropic endeavors. You did a day for Darlene, who was your sister. Talk about that and how that made you feel. And she suffered from MS. I know that my late great friend Bob Saget lost a sister to a disease as well. John Stamos, I think, lost his dad to one. Talk about that, because you are such a giving, wonderful human being. You have a heart as big as the city of Chicago.
Thank you. I'm humbled by that remark, but I had 8 brothers and sisters, as I said earlier. My oldest sister, Darlene, was 18 months older than me. And I can close my eyes. I don't remember a day without her as a child. Everywhere I went, my sister Darlene held my hand. She helped me across the street. She was a big sister in every definition of what a great big sister would be like. She was at church 6 out of 7 days a week. I was an altar boy. She would come to mass when I served mass. We would walk 2.5 miles in the snow, cold. I mean, we were raggedy kids.
Yeah.
And she was just a wonderful girl. At age 14, she went to work at a grocery store, and every penny she made, she brought home food for us kids. My mom and dad, my mom was a bartender. My dad was out drinking a lot. Sometimes when my mom would be out with him, poor Darlene she had no childhood. She had to watch over us all the time. And she never complained. I never heard her complain. She finally grew up, got out of the home, got older. And when she was just starting to live in her early 20s, she got MS. I didn't know what MS meant, and we learned all about it. Anyhow, she went from a cane to a walker to even a wheelchair. By this time, I'm in show business. I come home and I'm doing a show at Chicago Theater, and I go to the side to visit her. Her husband's out in the front lawn, mowing the lawn. He said, Darlene's inside. I go in. She had slumped over in her wheelchair and couldn't right herself. And I tried to right her. I got her straightened up. And this wonderful, sweet person who never said a negative word, and a church-going girl, she looked at me and she said, "Don't you ever come in here again talking to me about positive mental attitude. Don't ever. And don't ever come in here talking to me about God. I don't want to hear about God anymore. You've known me all my life. What did I ever do to God that God would punish me so severely? Come on. You always seem to have answers. Answer that question. What did I ever do to God that he would punish me like this?" And I didn't have an answer. I just was dumbfounded. And moments later, she began to cry. And she said, "Tommy, I'm so sorry. I lost my faith. I lost my faith." And I said, "If anybody deserves to lose their faith, you do." But when I left, I went back to California, and I was jogging one day. I used to run a mile a day. And I was thinking, what could I do to show her, not only her, but all the other people who are stricken with multiple sclerosis, that people care about them. And I thought, I'm going to run 26 miles. And I never run more than a mile. I said, I'll call it 26 miles for Darlene, and I'll have people pledge money for every mile I run, and the proceeds will go to multiple sclerosis for research. And so I got together with the JCs back in Illinois and started formulating all this. And then I started asking my celebrity friends. I asked, they're coming to Chicago with me. I got American Airlines to sponsor us, to fly all the celebrities in. Eddie Marinero from Hill Street Blues, and Frankie Avalon, my buddy, Tony Danza, Smokey Robinson, Frankie Valli. I'm going to leave out people. I mean, Jamie Farr, Connie Stevens. I could go on and on. I had 25, 30 celebrities, all Chicago Cubs, Rick Sutcliffe and Mark Grace and those guys. And then also the Chicago Bears, Jim McMahon and Tim Reitman and Jimbo Covert and Tom Thayer. All the Bears, they all came. Oh, yeah. And they would run part of the way with me, a mile or 2 miles. And Smokey Robinson's the only one who ran all 26 miles.
Wow.
With me, you know. And anyhow, that was for Darlene. And the end of this story is, I remember one day out in Park Forest, Illinois, when we completed our run, there was the Illinois Philharmonic Band there. There was a big festival there as well, combined with us. And I got all my celebrities on the stage. And Frankie Avalon's conductor wrote a song for Darlene that Smokey and Frankie sang on a record. And now everybody was singing it. It was called Don't Give Up. And they were singing to all the MS patients in the world, don't give up. You know, the road is lonely. And you keep saying to yourself, if I could only find the courage to win. Don't go grieving. You know, today is your day. Don't give up. Anyhow, Darlene came out in the van. And all these stars were on stage in the Illinois Philharmonic. And they were singing to her. And I told her, I said, remember when you asked me years ago, why you? I still don't know why you. But I know because of you, 15,000 people today are singing here in Park Forest, Illinois. And she said, no, Tommy, not because of me, because of you. I said, no, Darlene, all those things we learned in church, cast your bread, what you sow, you shall reap. All that love you gave to me is coming back to you now. You know.
Yeah.
Anyhow, that's
yeah. That touches one's heart very, very much. And show business people are the kindest, generous people in the world to go and help you and McMahon and all the. I knew Tom Thayer. I knew Dave Dorson. Dave lived in my building because I lived at 535 North Michigan Avenue. Yeah, back when rents were a lot cheaper than they are today.
By the way, Dave came to our event too. Dave and all the Bears. I'm saying.
Yeah. Well, I wish I would have known you then, as I'm hopefully. This is a budding friendship between you and I, because I will be there for you if I can, anytime, anywhere. There's just no doubt about that, because I believe in charity begins at home. Ed McMahon taught me that one way, 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 way back. 1979. From 1982, we're jumping back a little bit. 1979, you helped orchestrate something that made comedy history at the Comedy Store. You instigated and you helped comics finally get paid for being there on stage, which they weren't before. Oh, they were headliners are getting paid and people like that from Mitzi and other comedy club owners. But you headlined this whole Megillah of making sure that comics got paid. What was the metamorphosis of that at the very beginning for you?
When I went out to the West Coast, there was only one game in town. It was a Comedy Store. There wasn't an improvisation. There wasn't any of the other clubs at the time. There was the Comedy Store. And it was the mothership. And if you want to get discovered, that's where you went. And passing Mitzi's audition was more difficult than the Tonight Show's audition. But I got on. It took time, but I got on. And I became one of the regulars. And before you know it, with the Tonight Show, saw me, and I'm on my way. And I'm touring with Sammy Davis all over the country, and I'm making a lot of money. And I would come home like all the other comics and work on new material at the Comedy Store to go on the Tonight Show and Merv Griffin and Mike Douglas and Dinah Shore and Midnight Special, Rock Concert, Soul Train, all those shows we were doing. You went to the Comedy Store to try out new material. Well, there was one room called the Original Room that was the original Comedy Store. Mitzi later bought out Art LeBeau, who had a 50s club in that same building. And she then had a main showroom there. In that main showroom, she'd have Rodney Dangerfield or Jackie Mason, and they would get the door. If they charged $20 at the door, the comic would get the door, the headliner, and then she would get the food and drinks. And that was just the way it was. So the original room was where we all worked out. I come off the road one time, and I go to the original room to try out new material. They said, "Oh, Tom, you're in the main room." I said, "I'm in the main room." So wow, when I go in the main room, there's like 400 people there, and it's David Letterman, Jay Leno, Elaine Boozler, Robin Williams, me, right. You know, and you know, we killed. The whole night was great, and I didn't think much of it. You know, I go back to we all used to hang out at Cantor's on Fairfax Avenue, and all the time talking about, hey, about us working in the main room. And Jay Leno came in and he said, this is BS. He said, she pays them other guys. Maybe it took 5 of us to fill the room, but and now the comics are all talking about a meeting. I go to the meeting and 120 comics all talking at the same time will give you a headache, So,
yeah.
All they decided was to have another meeting. I go to the next meeting, and again, that's chaos. Well, I had been in the JCs. I knew Robert's Rules of Order. I knew how to. So I'd take a meeting, and so I start running the meeting. And I said, "Come on, you guys, settle down." And I got them organized. And when you got them organized, they were a force to be reckoned with. And we committees and subcommittees. And I kept going back to Mitzi, saying, "Mitzi, you're charging $5 at the door. Why don't you charge $6 and let the comics have that $1? If you have 100 people, they share $100. 200 people, no, they don't deserve to be paid." And it went on for arguing for weeks and weeks. And finally, the comedians voted to go on strike. I went back to Mitzi. I said, "Please, Mitzi, don't let this happen. You don't want." I love Mitzi. She gave me my break there. I said, it's not necessary. I thought it was about money, but it wasn't about money, because if she could have charged an extra $1 at the door, that would have was the whole issue. But anyhow, they went on strike. It lasted for 8 weeks. I sometimes never, the magnitude of it was unbelievable.
Yeah.
There was press written all over the world, in London, about comedians on strike. The word comedians on strike was funny in itself,
Yeah.
And, finally, after 8 weeks, we resolved it, and comedians started getting paid. And all across the land, comedy. See, when I started out in show business, there wasn't one comedy club in America. And in 5 years, there was over 500 comedy clubs. Tulsa, Oklahoma had 3. And they were paying very little money or nothing, because the mothership wasn't paying. So now, like if you went to Denver and they'd say, "We'll give you $100 for the whole week," you'd say, "I don't work for that low money." They say, "Well, you work at a comedy store for free. We'll give you at least $100 and a place to stay." So once Mitzi started paying, they had to fall in line down on the road. Even in London, I got telegrams from London saying, because of your comedians' efforts, we're now getting paid. It really changed the course of history in the comedy world. And I'll close with this. A while back, a young comedian came up to me and he said, "Somebody told me when you comedians started out, you work for free." I said, "Yes." He said, "The first day I went on stage, I got paid." I said, "Congratulations. Congratulations."
Yeah. You don't know the history behind it. By the way, what was it? Power? Mitzi just wanted the power over everybody? Was that the main ego thing?
A lot of people debate what it was. She felt like it was a college. She felt like she was training these kids, that they were getting their. I don't know what it was. I really don't. I sometimes I think about it, and I almost wish I hadn't have done it, because all of a sudden I became Jimmy Hoffa out here too. I became this union organizer. But I think that if she had it to do over again, I think she would have paid right away, and it would have been over within 2 days. 19 kids crossed the picket line, 18 guys and 1 girl, or it would have been over in 24 hours. But it lasted 8 weeks because of those who crossed the picket line.
Yeah.
But
I want to talk about the relationship you had with a man who America admires still to this day, and he's been gone a while. I first met him at the Fontainebleau Hotel, thanks to my uncle, way, way, way back when I was like 12, 13 years old. And Tommy, I think we have a picture of Tom with Mr. Frank Sinatra. And as we bring up that picture, and it may take him a second, there he goes. There you are. I like that picture, man.
You know what that was? That was at the Circle Star Theater in San Francisco, and a guy was doing a magazine story about me, and Frank was in his dressing room. It was before the show, and so the guy was going to take a picture, and Frank came out of the dressing room. He said, "What are you doing?" I said, "Oh, they're doing a story about me, Mr. S." He said, and the guy said something about, "You want to get in the picture?" He said, "Yeah, he's my man." And so Frank gets in the picture, and he's pointing at me. He said, "He's my number one man." And in fact, he said it in the introduction that night. We still have the tape, But But
That's
yeah,
a great picture. That's a great picture. How did the relationship begin? I mean, Johnny Dark, who's a friend of mine, we often talk about his relationship with Engelbert. How did yours begin with Mr. Sinatra?
I was touring with Smokey Robinson, and we were in Lake Tahoe at Caesars in Lake Tahoe, and Frank was appearing at Harrah's next door, which, if you know Lake Tahoe, there's Caesars, and then there's a casino, and then there's Harrah's.
Right.
And I had made up my mind. I had seen Frank perform. When I was a little boy shining shoes, he was on all the jukeboxes.
Yeah.
So I'd seen him perform several times in arenas and stuff. So I made up my mind I was going to be with Smokey one week there. And I thought, well, I'll go over there one night and catch Frank's show. And I had worked Harris many times with Sammy Davis. So I knew the people there. I called the maitre d' one night. I don't know why I picked that night. Divine intervention, I guess. But that night when I came off stage, I didn't even change out of my stage clothes at Caesars. I bolted out the side door and I was running over to Caesars because I didn't want to miss Frank's opening. Frank Sinatra created more excitement walking out to a microphone than most people did with their whole act. When he walked out on stage, the arena would just light up, just seeing him walk out on the stage. And I didn't want to miss that. I'm running through the casino. I'm ready to go in the showroom. And the vice president of Harrah's Hotel, Holmes Hendrickson, was out in front of the hotel, out in front of the showroom with a big heavyset guy with a cigar. And so as I'm running by, Holmes said, Tommy, I said, hi, Mr. Hendrickson. He said, Tommy, come here. And I reluctantly went over because I didn't want to miss Frank's opening.
Was it Jilly?
No, it was Mickey Rudin. He said, Tommy, this is Mickey Rudin, which is Frank Sinatra's lawyer. Well, I recognized the name. He was a very powerful guy in our business. So he said, Mickey, this is Tom Dreesen. And I think Tom would make a great opening act for Frank Sinatra. And the lawyer got a pained expression on his face like he heard that a million times. And he winked at the vice president, but I caught the wink. And he looked at me. He said, hey, kid, if I gave you a week with Frank, would you want more than $50,000? I said, Mr. Rudin, put it this way. If you gave me a week with Frank, would you want more than $50,000? He said, oh, I like this kid. He started laughing. A week later, they called me. Would you like to do 1 week in Atlantic City at the Golden Nugget with Frank Sinatra? I thought, I'll get my picture taken with him. I'll hang it at every bar back in Chicago and everything. But the second night I was with him at the Golden Nugget, I scored real good on opening night and great audiences. And the second night, he and his wife, Barbara, took me out to dinner. And I'll never forget, it was like he was eating dinner. He set his knife and his fork down. I was sitting across from him. And he looked at me. He said, I like your material and I like your style. I'd like you to do a few other dates with me if you're interested. And I didn't say, let me check my calendar. I said, yeah. And it turned into 14 years, 45, 50 cities a year, a friendship. I stayed in his home 6-8 times a year. We drove around the desert till dawn numerous times. I was a pallbearer at his funeral, and I spoke at his funeral, and I miss him every day of my life.
Yeah, I know the feeling. He was something else. When I met him, like I said, I was about 12 or 13 years old. Dean was there. Sammy was there. Sammy was performing at the Fontainebleau. Dean had come in to play golf. As you know, Dean, he loved to play golf. And Frank was performing, I think, somewhere in South Florida. I think at the Eden Rock or someplace. But he was so nice. I mean, everybody has this thing of, he was quiet, but he was nice. He was funny. Everybody was telling jokes, and they loved Tubby and his jokes and everything. And that was my first introduction to show business as far as meeting real celebrities. I would just meet the locals that were friends with Tubby. But through that, I became good friends with Dean Martin and his family. But his music. And, the thing is, he was talking about that because one of my favorite singers of all times is Tony Bennett, the late Tony Bennett. And they asked Frank once about what's the difference between a good singer and a not so good singer. When they said phrasing. Mm-hmm. Phrasing is the key to it all. If you don't phrase right, it ain't going to sound right. So, I mean, he was just the king. Lady Be My Luck Tonight was one of my favorite songs of all time.
What people forget about Frank Sinatra is what a brilliant actor he was. I was sitting with him one night in his compound down in the desert. It was Gregory Peck. It was Kirk Douglas. It was Clint Eastwood, Robert Wagner. It was Jack Lemmon. All the women had gone to bed. and they were talking about acting and directing, and I was just sitting there listening to these incredible actors defining that craft. I'm an actor. I mean, I studied acting, but not of their caliber. But I was just fascinated by their conversation. But I noticed that they were paying incredible reference to Frank. You know, that they would listen when Frank would speak. They listen, and I finally was curious because everybody out here in Hollywood is always talking about who they studied with. You know, and so I said, Frank, did you ever study acting? And Gregory Peck grabbed my arm real hard. He said, acting lessons would have ruined him. He was a diamond in the rough you don't fool with. When you gave Frank Sinatra a song, when you gave him a song, to him it was a script. What did the writer feel the night the writer took pen in hand? Frank would immerse himself in the lyric and become that lonely guy in the bar whose woman left him, and he's never going to find love again. And you felt that. And the joy of songs, come fly with me. You know, he would immerse himself in that lyric and become that lonely guy. No other singer, even Tony, as much as I love Tony, I did shows with Tony, and I know Frank loved him. But even Tony phrased it, but you felt the lyric in your chest. You know, there's a song, I mean, there's so many songs, but he sang a song once, If You Go Away, and if you're in a bar at 2:00 in the morning and your woman left you, and that song is on the jukebox, before that song's over, you'll put a gun in your mouth.
Yeah, absolutely. Tom, we got about 5 minutes to go. Two final questions. One, what is your favorite venue that you've worked in your career? I mean, I imagine there's more than one, but one in particular.
Well, you know, if it's in Tahoe, it's Harris. It was always a great showroom. If it's in Vegas, it's either the Desert Inn. I was under contract at 9 different hotels, but the Desert Inn, Sands, Riviera, they had low ceilings. The Golden Nugget, Caesars was a tough room to work. Every comedian likes a low ceiling. Laughter is sound. It hits the ceiling and comes at you. The DI, the Desert Inn, you know, the Sands, again, the Riviera, the Golden Nugget. They're in Chicago, anywhere in Chicago, the Chicago Theater, the Mount Horizon, the Auditorium Theater. That's my hometown. So when you go there, you feel that love and that warmth, you know. It just depends on where I'm at, you know. But I would always say Vegas, because when you were a kid, all you ever heard about was Las Vegas. And the first time I went to Vegas and had my name on the marquee with Sammy Davis Jr. at Caesar's Palace, it was like a surreal, you know. So Vegas was a wonderful place to work in.
First time I ever was on stage at the Caesar's Palace, I'll be honest with you, before I got on stage and they were introducing me, I almost had a heart attack. I swear to God. It was like, oh my God. And I've performed in front of audiences before. The last question. When you're all alone, you're driving your car, you're on an airplane going somewhere, or you're by yourself watching TV, or you're reading a book or whatever, who is Tom Dreesen?
If I close my eyes right now, I see a little boy with a shoe shine box trudging through the snow, going from bar to bar, trying to make money to help feed his brothers and sisters. That's who I am. I'm that little boy. I'm that little boy whose all of my dreams came true. All of my prayers were answered.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a heartbeat away from that little boy all the time.
Yeah. Jay Leno once said, you never forget your beginnings. You never forget your childhood. I don't forget my growing up in Wilkes-Barre, Pennsylvania, in poverty. I mean, you know what Wilkes-Barre is like. You've been through there. You know what it's like. But you are probably, I hope, a new friend to me. I really do hope so. I love you with all my heart. I really do. I'm ready to cry because when you go to Chicago, everybody says, do you know Tom? Do you know Tom? Do you know Tom? Now I can officially say, yeah, I know Tom. And I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for taking the time out of your day to join us here on Main Street. I hope we can get you back at some point. Please stay where you are. I want to close out the show, and then I want to talk to you just for a couple of minutes afterwards, if you don't mind. And ladies and gentlemen, I want to thank all of you for taking the moment to join us here. And with Mr. Tom Dreesen, one of the finest gentlemen you'll ever meet, funny comedian, actor, motivational speaker. Please get a hold of him at tomdreesen.com, and you can get all the contact information on him there. And I want to thank him again, and I want to thank all of you. And until next week, would you please take care of yourselves and each other? Until then, have a good one.